now.
The questions that came off Twitter were really very varied and very interesting. So do you want to start with, let's start with who's Jared Tate? What is Digibyte? Let's do it for those listeners who aren't familiar.
Okay, that sounds good.
And then we can migrate into what's going on now. And then we'll go into the questions that everyone's asking, because there are so many of them that they almost want a personal time with you. If I could read between all the lines, can I get a minute with Jared? So I'm honored. I'm sorry for the confusion, but your listeners are all looking for information about Digibyte, what's happening with blockchain, what's happening with you, how do you build real momentum around this? So my question for you is, how do we begin to engage with them? Let's use this as a platform and make it valuable for you and for them. So first, who's Jared Tate? Share it with our listeners.
Well, I like to think I'm a simple guy. I was born in a very small town in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. In fact, my hometown is so small, it was the first city in the world that was actually lit by nuclear power. A little town called Arco, Idaho. To this day, still has less than 800 people in it. But that's actually the place where I discovered Bitcoin back in 2012. My father had he had actually fallen off a roof. He had broken his neck and both of his arms. And I moved back home from Phoenix, Arizona to take care of him because I was working as a freelance web developer at the time. And obviously in a small town in the middle of nowhere, you've got a lot of time on your hands. And that's when I was surfing the internet and I discovered Bitcoin. So when I was, looking through the Bitcoin source code back in 2013, I actually started out as a Bitcoin miner. And when the first ASIC miners, which are the super advanced specialized miners, came out in the spring of 2013, at the time I was actually mining Bitcoin with my gaming computer. And within about 2 days, I went from being able to mine almost a Bitcoin a day to I calculated it would take me about 6,000 days to mine another Bitcoin. So I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is not how this is supposed to be. Bitcoin is supposed to be a decentralized system. And then I started seeing some of the fundamental flaws in the Bitcoin protocol. So it's a beautiful idea. But, starting out when I first started thinking about Digibyte, my original intent was to create something to prototype changes that could later be implemented into the Bitcoin protocol. I never really thought Digibyte would take off to where it is today. It was kind of an experiment. But that's kind of the story of how Digibyte started. And Digibyte started with the Genesis block, which is the first block in the blockchain, with the news headline, Target, 110 million customers' data stolen.
Yes.
And that has kind of been the root, and that was the beginning, and that's kind of the vision of where we saw this technology and where it can go.
So your commentators everywhere, I was doing research and they said something very powerful. You're the sleeping giant cryptocurrency. And everybody is talking about how do we begin to build you into the leader? Because in 4 years, you have the longest, most secure, most amazing system. So, talk a little bit about how you're beginning to focus on the security of it, the size of it, the scope of it. Give our listeners who may not be cryptocurrency gurus on this, what's going on?
Well, to start out there, Dr. Simon, over the last 4 years, almost 5 years now, Digibyte has underwent a series of improvements. We've actually undergone something known as a hard fork, which is where we completely change the protocol and we upgrade it. And we've actually been through that 4 times. And we've done a series of those, which, by the way, 4 times in this industry is almost an eternity, especially to be able to pull it off successfully without a lot of issues. And over that last 4 years and 4 hard forks, we've implemented a series of improvements to build upon the initial foundation of what Digibyte was. And those improvements have actually been implemented in dozens of other blockchains since. So, part of the technology that we've developed and pioneered is literally securing billions and billions worth of cryptocurrency now. It's been implemented in everything. One of the things we developed called DigiShield is now being implemented and has been implemented in everything from Bitcoin Cash to Zcash, partially into Ethereum and many other cryptocurrencies. So we have been a forerunner, and we have been the first to do a lot of things in this space. And so one of the things that sets us apart is, we were never an ICO or a token. It's been a completely all volunteer effort for the last 4.5, 5 years, which is completely different than how you're seeing projects operate in this time. So when people, talk about us being a sleeping giant, that's kind of what they're referring to, is the technology can stand on its own, it can speak for itself, and it can market itself. And also we're really holding, to that true vision of a honest, decentralized system.
Well, your transactions can operate 40 times the rate of a Bitcoin. It's one of the most secure cryptos out there. You have a different vision. It sounds like you're building an infrastructure to transform transactions, security, reduce the uncertainties that we work with, and expand it well beyond just the cryptocurrency. This sounds like you're building a system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is our vision. We are building a worldwide platform.
Yes.
Sure, you can send payments in a matter of seconds to somebody in Australia from the United States, or somebody in Europe to somebody in South America, for a fraction of a cent. But the real utility here is a worldwide communications platform that's rigid and secure. And from that, you can start building a lot of cool stuff on top of it. So the way I like to break this down is, if you imagine almost an Oreo, right? Or a cake, but 3 layers. So that bottom layer, you effectively have a communications protocol. So at the very most basic level, the Digibyte blockchain, and this also applies to Bitcoin, is a very, very effective decentralized communication system. And you can bounce a number of messages back and forth with that. And it's secured by the most advanced cryptography on the planet. Now, in that middle layer, which you get on the next layer, you have an incentive layer. And that incentive layer is where the digital assets known as digibytes or Bitcoin come in. Now, once you have that incentive layer, you incentivize people to run the software, and that's what allows for the communications at the bottom layer. Now, once you have those 2 layers, at the top layer, you have an applications layer, which at this point in time is almost unlimited, and it's just in its infancy of what is actually going to be possible with this technology. There's so much more possible than simply just payments. So
that's really the purpose. So I'm an anthropologist. We study culture. And as I was digging into the world that's changing, that you're leading, Dubai wants to be entirely on blockchain. It wants all of its information on blockchain. Zug, the city in Switzerland, wants to be a crypto valley that is completely on blockchain. I'm watching companies begin to develop, to use blockchain to transform the intersections of what's going on. You're a platform. So let's talk about the vision. Where do you see things going? Because our conversation started with, why don't businesses know what this is about? And I spoke to 60 CEOs over the last 3 days. I must tell you, they don't know what's going on here at all. And they sort of were scratching their head as if to say, really? It's not just about Bitcoin. I said, no, this is transformational. This is going to challenge the whole way you do everything. Tell us.
This is a fundamental paradigm shift in humanity. It is literally a fundamental way in the way that things are done on the internet. And it's also a reinvention of the internet itself. I like to use the analogy that blockchain technology is very similar to what we see in nature and what has allowed us as a species to evolve and survive. To give you an example, if you take the DNA that's in my fingertip and the DNA, that's in my ear, it's the same DNA, right? Well, if I had a centralized system where I only had the DNA in my finger that controlled and dictated my entire body, and for some reason I had an accident and my finger was gone, that would be a problem, right? Well, if you look throughout nature, there's this innate ability for biological systems to replicate themselves in an exact pattern, whether it's the spores of a mushroom, the trees of a seed, and that's what allows them to survive in a decentralized fashion. So when I look at data, I look at it like a living, breathing thing that should be decentralized and replicated and secured. And that is I think a good way for people that are brand new to this technology to just look around them. Look how many times you see a decentralized system that's replicated very similar to how a blockchain functions. And if you study human history, you have these trends towards centralization, decentralization, centralization, decentralization. And I believe in 2008, with the financial crisis, we hit peak centralization. And out of that, came the first prototype of the Bitcoin protocol. And now we're headed towards a massive wave of decentralization. And the one thing I've noticed, traveling around the world, speaking at different events, is Western businesses are the least informed on this topic, and they are the slowest ones to actually start adopting and understanding this technology. Whereas, I tell people there's 7 billion people on this planet, 300 million Americans, and that other 7 billion people is extremely hungry for change and opportunity, and they're adopting and adapting and embracing blockchain technology much faster than Americans are, and the Western societies. But Europe is even more so than the American society.
Well, and I mean, this is, I think, very much a big idea, because their cultures are open to the innovations in very big ways, and ours are so secure. I mean, we were talking about something like Western Union being resistant to the disruptor that's coming, that's already in place, that will allow you to take one iPhone or cell phone to another across the world to transfer money at a much lower cost, much faster, and in a moment. Banks are slowly beginning to realize that blockchain will eliminate the need to have a temple to put your money in altogether. And why not become a leader in the transformation instead of a resistor to it? And supply chain, you want to tell your supply chain story? Because I have enough logistics companies in my belt of clients, and they're all going to be disrupted, aren't they?
Well, if we can go back to the Western Union topic for a second, and it's actually interesting. A lot of people in the Digibyte community probably won't know this, but in 2016, in the beginning, I actually went to Western Union's worldwide digital innovation headquarters and lab, and I met with them for about 3 hours at their headquarters downtown San Francisco, innovation lab, right? Presented Digibyte, everything we're working on at the time with Digibyte Gaming, at the time with payments and everything. And they told me, they're like, wow, this is amazing. This is pretty cool. You can literally, put us out of business tomorrow, right?
Yes.
But we would never go for something like this, and we would never embrace it, because we make billions floating interest on payments between countries.
Yes.
So the board would never go for this. And I appreciated the frankness and the honesty at the time. But that's kind of been my interaction with a lot of companies that I met with. One of the questions I saw was, do we have an NDA with some Fortune 500 company, right? Well, part of having an NDA is not acknowledging that you have an NDA, right? But, just to kind of get it out there to people, frankly, no. Because any sort of public Fortune 500 company is not going to risk their brand and associate it with a decentralized open source system that they can't control. It's just not going to happen. It's just they're fundamentally opposing forces.
Yep. Well, the human brain hates to change. And I often wonder what it was like the first people who invented fire and were able to capture it, so they can now cook their antelope and share it differently. And whether they all fought the idea that fire was good or bad. So that change is really, the herd mentality takes over. This is the way we've always done it. And you need to look, when you said that the 7 billion people, there are only 350 million in the States, all of them are opened up to opportunity, possibilities, well beyond because there's nothing to resist. It's sort of like, this is really cool. So if Estonia wants to bring in blockchain and completely go blockchain, and they're sort of way all open for it. And when Indian farmers can use the blockchain in order to find out what the market is and actually make exchanges, it's going to come soon all around the states. It's going to be interesting to watch.
Well, you know, it's and a lot of this has already been happening. I mean, look at, for instance, what I believe it's BitPesa in Africa has been doing for the past 3 or 4 years. Like, they've literally been used as a stabilizer for exchange rates between countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it's been there, it's been effective, it's been working. You know, a lot of these solutions are already out there. Like, you know, you mentioned the trade solution. You know, what we developed, you know, starting in 2016, presented to a lot of people, has already been implemented and is actively out there, securing international trade shipments. You know, documents has nothing to do with payments. We're talking about contracts and signatures, and we're talking about a process where, you know, a retailer put in an order. It took 9 days on average for that to be accepted, and the contract, you know, formalized, the purchase order, etc. We took that system from 9 days to 1 day with a cryptographic-based identity blockchain solution, which is DigiSign. So if you go to DigiSign, you can sign up, test it out, and try it. So a lot of these solutions are out there. I mean, and there's, you know, it's an exciting time because it's just in the beginning. You know, I think it's really fascinating to think where we're going to be in 5 years with this technology, because it's just starting. It's just beginning.
You know, it's interesting. John Scully, I think it was, who said at one point, technology should either be invisible or beautiful. And in some ways, it's the invisibility of blockchain that makes it off-putting. You know, I can't see it, I can't touch it. On the other hand, the simplicity of it is really quite beautiful. Once you put in all the infrastructure around it, I don't have to see it. I just need to transform the way I'm going to buy a house and get title for it, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of which, I don't want to talk too much on the subject, but I actually personally, I think some people in the Digibyte community are well with this. I'm actually working on that process similar. I can't go into detail with real estate. It's exciting. We'll know more in a few months, but yeah, absolutely. You know, because what it really boils down to is with the decentralized blockchain, and I want to make an important note out here so people understand this. Not all blockchains are the same. You're seeing this term being thrown around loosely. You'll have teams that either want investment or development, and they'll be like, oh, we're on a blockchain, but we run our system on 12 centralized servers we control, which in my mind is just basically a clustered database, and it's not a blockchain. It's just not a blockchain.
Maybe the cloud, but it's not a blockchain.
Yeah, it's just not a real blockchain. So, you know, I hate to invoke some Trump references here, but there's totally fake blockchains out there. So, and they're advertising it, and some of them are worth billions of dollars, and they're not even real functioning blockchains. So that'll be weeded out over time. But once you have a decentralized backbone, what we really have, it's the first time in history you have a decentralized, trustless system that anybody can reference electronically from their mobile phone or their desktop. Or I've even seen blockchains that are capable of being broadcasted over ham radio without the internet. That's fascinating.
It is. And we can connect. That is really fascinating.
Well, you know, one of the things that I believe this technology will lead to, and I'm all for, is literally decentralization of the internet itself.
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with the term of a mesh network.
Yes.
Where devices can just communicate. Well, as more IoT devices are on the planet, you know, I think we're, especially with 5G rolling out, you know, 5 years from now, we could have a system that's completely blockchain based for authentication that doesn't even involve our ISP, doesn't even involve some central snooping authority. And we could literally, you know, liberate ourselves and be completely electronically free and private. And that's kind of the vision, you know, I would like to see and working towards achieving.
Jared, what do you think of the main hurdles? Because 5 years is a short, long time. You know, in some ways, there's, you know, what is keeping, other than the human resistance to change and the reluctance to risk what we have for what could be really transformative, you know, what do you see as I'm going to say the Western Union lookalikes, but what are the hurdles that are coming up? other than we're making a lot of money and I don't want to bother.
Well, the first thing there is the fact that everybody thinks the blockchain is just money. I think that's the first hurdle.
Yes. Oh, please, it is not.
Education. I think education is by far the biggest hurdle, and that's where I appreciate you taking the time, Dr. Simon, to do this talk because I feel like this is important to just have these discussions and to inform people that it's not just money. We're talking. One of the things when I've met with companies and I've talked to, whether it's a bank and their compliance officer or law firms. One of the things I've learned is if I go in there and I just start talking about payments and, we can send, digibytes in a fraction of a second and you can make payments to Australia or South America, right? That instantly brings up all these red flags and barriers. Oh, well, what about, drugs? What about terrorist financing? What about, money laundering? Instantly, right? Those are the objections. So if you lead in with that, you always hit these walls and these barriers. And I've found that the best thing when I sit down with some of these people is I look at them, I'm like, okay, so how do you feel about your Equifax data and your credit data being exposed and online that anybody, with 5 minutes I could go look up, right? Or how do you feel about your data being breached in, with Yahoo or, name it, there's a data breach, right? Instantly, instantly it changes the conversation. And I'm like, this technology can fix 95% of those security vulnerabilities if we embrace it and allow it and give it room to prosper and grow. So why should technologies or anybody listening or watching or hearing this in the future, why should you care? Cybersecurity. That is the biggest problem businesses are going to face. That is the biggest problem they're facing.
And it's not the future, it is today. It is pretty ubiquitous, right?
It is right now.
Right. And the other problem is there's not enough people to handle the cybersecurity. They don't even know how to manage it. So it's so transformative, it could eliminate it, right?
Yeah. You can never fully eliminate it because you always have the human element. But yeah, we can get 95% of the way there. It's really fundamentally simple. The problem with the internet today is our reliance on what is known as certificate authorities, root certificate authorities. So when you buy a new computer, when you buy a new Windows computer or a new Apple computer, they have these cryptographic keys, which effectively are the exact same thing as the keys in your Bitcoin wallet or Digibyte wallet. So they function the same. These root keys are used to issue root certificates for all websites. And there's only about 15 or 20 of them that are used globally. And if you buy a computer in China and you buy a computer in the United States, you're going to get different pre-installed root certificates because this is how nation states attack each other.
Yeah.
Right. So fundamentally, if we take that system and completely decentralize it, you can eliminate the majority of DDoS attacks. You can, eliminate the majority of centralized points of failure. So sure, one person can be compromised. Okay, that's possible. But it's not where if you compromise one server, you're getting, 10 million passwords and user accounts and information and identity. So it's really going back to that nature example, decentralizing data. That's the most important thing we can do. Secure it, duplicate it, and decentralize it. So if one thing is taken out, it has its own independent security.
So with that in mind, let me migrate to the questions that came to us off Twitter for you. So I'm going to give our listeners who have been so kind to say, I must talk to Jared, and they've really personalized the questions. Do you have anything in particular, or shall I start and read you some of these things?
Yeah, go for whatever you see first.
Because, now that we sort of have a framework for it, some of the resistance going out there, some of business is time to really dig deeper into it. Some of these things, how fast will the DGB network eventually get and when? And what kind of applications can be built on top of it? That's a big question. But it sounds like one of those, I should better understand what we're doing here to build accelerated speed and the type of application. Any thoughts?
Well, I think to really fully answer this, I think we need to kind of go back in time here and look at where it started, right? So, simply, to describe basically fundamentally, how does a blockchain actually work, right? The way that I've used to describe this to people is imagine that you are, let's say you're in a restaurant. okay? And you take a 10-minute snapshot of everything everybody orders in a restaurant, right? And you take that and you write that down on an Excel spreadsheet. So you just list it in a ledger format, right? Well, that snapshot becomes what's known as a block. And so the 10-minute block started with Bitcoin when Bitcoin came out, originally it was formed 2009, right? So you have this Excel spreadsheet that's a block. It's a block of data. It's a snapshot. Well, then instead of just having everybody in that one restaurant, you actually add the transactions of everybody on the planet that has, made a transaction in a restaurant, right? Well, in the case of Bitcoin, you actually can go outside of that. You can actually say not only just restaurant, but anybody paying for anything everywhere, right? Well, obviously you can't take 100,000 transactions per second and put that in a block that only happens every 10 minutes. So how do you fix that problem? Well, as a lot of people know, the Bitcoin blockchain basically became bloated and full years ago. It was maxed out. So one of the things that we did and we pioneered with Digibyte is when Digibyte launched, we had I think it was a 2-minute block time. And over the course of those improvements over the years, we sped it up to where we have a block happening every 15 seconds. Now, what that allows for is that's how we can actually handle 40 times the amount of data and transactions worldwide that Bitcoin has, right? Well, why did we limit it to 15 seconds? Well, it was actually based on research that was done by Microsoft, and it actually has to do with the latency of the entire internet worldwide. So if you're in Cape Town, South Africa, and you send an email or a message to somebody in New York City, it literally has to go through these deep sea underground cables, and it takes time. It's not instantaneous, right? And what we found is you really can't, with today's modern internet infrastructure, you really can't go more than 15 seconds without, creating advantages for miners in certain geographic regions, right? Where they're able to basically propagate and take over. That's a whole other side conversation. But, we figure through testing, that's about as fast as you can go. So once you hit that limit, what you do is you simply make that Excel spreadsheet bigger and you allow more data to be transmitted and more transactions. So that is how Digibyte scales. And what we're doing is effectively every 2 years, we're going to be doubling the block size. So, the idea is by the year 2020, we can match Visa. And then going into the year 2035, we estimate we can be doing upwards of 300,000 transactions per second, which is, Visa, I think, is doing about 2,000 transactions per second on average at this point in time, right? So, what I tell people about scalability in the future is, a blockchain is kind of like a living, breathing thing. It's going to continue to evolve. Unlike a lot of people in our field, instead of just going out and creating a new name and then going out and hyping up and pumping up a new currency, like some of my peers have done, we could have basically relaunched Digibyte with 4 different names over the last 4 years, probably made hundreds of millions of dollars by now, but we didn't. We continued to improve and to enhance the Digibyte blockchain, and we'll continue to do that. So, going into the future, we'll get to a point where we'll have to swap out the main encryption algorithms, right? Quantum computing. I wouldn't be surprised if either the United States or China, or maybe the Russians have quantum computers that are actually out in the wild. Well, eventually we're going to have to implement quantum proof algorithms. And actually, a lot of people don't know this, but there's actually a fundamental flaw in the programming behind every blockchain, where effectively we can go into more detail on a side note, but effectively, I think it's like the year 2039, they're all going to fail because of a coding bug that's actually in the programming language. So we got to fix all of them by that point anyway. But I don't want to start too much of a conspiracy theory there. But
no, you've been very without it today. We could go into conspiracy theories, but the question, they're looking for what's coming next. So let me play out another question. DigiID. The DigiID seems to be a theme that's going through all of this. You want to talk about the DigiID and the security of the idea?
Yeah. So first of all, DigiID is 100% community-led effort. It's actually launching today. If you go to digi-id.io, You can go on there and you can read about it. There's information. The community's done an amazing job with it. We had a fantastic designer help with it. We had some awesome programmers. And it's been something we actually had prototyped almost 2 years ago. But what it really allows for is for you to use the Digibyte blockchain for more than just payments. It allows for you to log into a website, effectively replacing passwords or SMS two-factor. Do you remember when the guy by the name of Craig Wright came out and he claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin?
I don't, but that's okay.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of drama in the cryptocurrency world a year or two back. Well, all of us that are in the space asked him to do one thing. We said, use your private keys from the Genesis block, sign a message cryptographically stating that you are the creator. And he didn't do that. I used the Genesis block from Digibyte and said, I, Jared Tate, am the founder and creator. And I signed it cryptographically with my wallet private keys from that first block. Charlie Lee of Litecoin did the same thing. The founder, I think Jackson Palmer of Dogecoin did the same thing. And we're like, that's all you got to do to prove that you are the creator.
You are it, right? Go ahead.
And that little known property is the completely most underutilized aspect of blockchain technology that's out there today. Because with that, you have the ability to start building security stacks for software that is basically limitless. And here's the more important thing. When you use that to secure everything from documents to healthcare records to insurance contracts, you name it, it basically can scale infinitely. You don't actually have to send transactions every single time. So, that's what we're trying to do, is to educate people with DigiID that, hey, you can implement this. So we have, for example, we have a WordPress plugin. So you can actually use it to sign into your WordPress website. So your users can go to your website. They don't have to use a password. They can literally just take their phone, scan a QR code. It's linked to their Digibyte wallet, and they can actually sign in. Now, here's the thing. You don't actually have to use the same Digibyte wallet that you actually transact with, right? You don't really want to do that. You want to use a separate one. But, there's a lot of cool features that will be developed. But, that our main goal, and the launch coincides today with this interview, and I believe actually Josiah is doing another interview today, is you're able to, really start doing some cool stuff.
Now, will that help me open my car door or get into other kinds of things?
We actually started prototyping a thing to unlock your house with a smart lock. And here's the problem with the smart locks that you'll go into Best Buy or other electronics retailers. Once again, going back to this problem of centralized root certificates, every single one of these devices that's being manufactured has the same back-end crypto and security.
Yeah.
And that's the vulnerability. So if you go buy a webcam or a smart door lock, and then some guy goes in and hacks that system, all of a sudden, instead of just taking over one, they're taking over 100,000 of them simultaneously. And that's why every IoT device that's created should be rolled in with its own blockchain based identity or cryptographic public and private keys. And that's where we can fix, once again, 95% of these security vulnerabilities that are out there.
Now, we're sort of summarizing the questions that came through, and you've been really great at talking about them. One, the theme is the value of the cryptocurrency itself, because what I'm excited by is blockchain isn't just about currency. But a lot of the investors in it are concerned about the coin and its value and so forth. We haven't talked about it because in some ways we almost didn't want to, because for business, it's not about the currency. It's about what blockchain can do to really transform the way they do things. But I do think we should talk a little bit about the coin, the currency, and what you see going on with that.
Well, first of all, you just touched on it. Like I think those that know me in the space, I hate talking about currency. I hate talking about price. One of the things that I've been saying for 4.5 years is I don't give speculative advice. I never give price predictions because, one, if I tried, I would mess it up. And two, the fundamental problem right now is when people look at a blockchain currency, when they look at Bitcoin or they look at Digibyte, inherently, they're comparing it to fiat. And as long as you have a fractional reserve system, banking system, where the powers that be can print as much money as they want infinitely,
Mhm.
You're never going to have a direct, stable price in cryptocurrencies. It just won't happen. It's going to be volatile because when you have in the case of Digibyte, where Digibyte is limited to 21 billion digibytes in 21 years, it's created at a finite rate. There's a percent less new coming into circulation every month. We can't go in there and just print more. Same with Bitcoin. You'll have 21 million Bitcoin in 144 years, right? So it's a very scarce, very finite, mathematically determined and enforced system. So as long as you have this limited scarce supply, you can't have a functional peg to a fiat currency, any fiat currency.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, a lot of times have trouble with that. You know, it's advertised as a currency, it's this and that. But also a lot of times I feel like people fundamentally just don't understand their money and exactly how it works. Or the fact that their money, like in the case of the United States, has been reinvented 5 times in the last 100 years, effectively how it works. So to me, like it's the first use case. It was obviously the most important use case because that's what's got everybody attention. Everybody likes money. But it's not the best long-term use case because, you know, I've never been one of those in the community that's like, oh, cryptocurrency should replace every fiat currency on the planet. Like it's not going to happen anytime soon because the powers that be, the people that control that are never going to let that happen. That's why, you know, what we're trying to position Digibyte, cybersecurity, but there's nothing wrong with incentivizing those use cases with a digital asset, right? So instead of talking about currency, I like to transform that conversation into the fact that with this blockchain technology, you have the ability to start creating unique digital assets that has never been possible before. So when you start talking about putting property deeds on a blockchain or ownership stakes in whatever sort of property you start talking about that can be transferred digitally, you know, because up until the advent of a blockchain, like if I send you an email, I'm not sending you that original email, right? I'm sending you a copy of that email, and that copy can be duplicated infinitely. So you talk about a picture, that photo can be put on the internet, it can be shared thousands of times, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you put that photo and you attach it and embed it cryptographically and give it a unique identity on a blockchain, you can literally have the chance for a very unique, independent digital piece of art that can be stored and cryptographically secured and proven that it originated at a certain point in time. Yeah. and kept completely original. So, you know, you think about the opportunities from that, you can go in a number of amazing places.
They are all amazing too, because all the problems, the limitations with uncertainty now, on reneging, on questioning can all be eliminated in a fashion that would create enormous transformation in how we deal with each other. I mean, the idea of taking a picture and making it unique on your wallet, which protects it, and then you decide how you want to share it with whom, is really going to be quite something. There are some that are arising. Is it Viewly, who wants to compete with YouTube by allowing you to share your video with somebody else, and the more times it's shared, the more coins or tokens, and if not, they skip over it. So now it's not somebody manipulating us, it's us being able to control all that we have going on. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just imagine this. Imagine, for instance, you go to your physician, right? You have, like, let's say, an annual checkup. You walk into your physician and you have your smartphone or another device, and they can literally use their own wallet keys to authenticate. You use your private keys, you decrypt, and you open up your healthcare records.
Yes.
And nobody else can see it but you and your physician. You don't have to have 8 different parties in between. And then, you know, if something happens, you know, your lawyer, your spouse, they can have what's known as multisig. So they can also have a private key. Yep. And they can access it.
Yep. But you don't have any of that now. There's no interoperability. The medical records don't talk to each other. You have to tell every doctor all over again, everything. Hopefully you remember it. Healthcare is going to be tremendously transformed. And I don't think that should wait 5 years. That should come right now.
Yeah, that should start happening right away. And you know, every government on the planet, which I think most of them are, except for in a lot of cases, the American one, should be embracing this technology. We should be making, you should be incentivizing the creation of this technology, whether it's in healthcare,
Yeah.
insurance,
Yeah.
real estate, copyrights, digital rights. The legal profession is going to be disrupted. If you look at, like, for instance, in the United States, the backlog of court cases in a lot of areas, a lot of this stuff can be resolved with blockchain-based systems that can resolve contracts, can resolve disputes, automatically.
I can almost imagine doing tax returns on my blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which my accounting clients won't be happy about, but that's coming.
Yeah. No, that is definitely a problem. There's a huge opportunity there if a startup wants to tackle that. But it's a very exciting time for sure.
Well, I've had a very exciting time talking to you, my friend. I can only tell you that as you step out and you look at our society at a snapshot, this is, I think the first website was 1991, and look what's happened since. I remember the head of Blockbuster not being concerned about Netflix, and where's Blockbuster? And I remember all the people had Blackberries, and they don't exist anymore. Certainly not the way they did. And so the times are going to be changing, and thanks to Bob Dylan, they are changing fast. And but this has been more fun than fun. I can only thank you for taking the time. I know that our friends on Twitter were all very excited about the possibilities. And what I will only ask them to do is send more questions, and we'll forward them along. But in some ways, they were all asking similar questions, some of which you covered, and some of which we answered directly. But it's a state of tumult right now. We don't know where it's going. We don't know really if it's real. We're making investments in it, but I do think it's going to be transforming. Your last thoughts, and how can they reach you if they'd like to?
Well, I try to be as accessible as possible, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, Telegram, email, and a number of different things. And honestly, like, I do apologize to people. Sometimes I'll wake up and I will literally have 1,000 messages across all platforms. And it's, as one person, it's impossible to just keep on top of everything.
Yeah.
But, if anybody takes anything away from this, like, where's this technology headed? It's going to be a merger. You're going to see artificial intelligence, blockchain, and IoT technology come together. And that's really going to be how systems function moving forward for the next 20, 30 years. So, if you're out there, you're interested in this technology, I encourage you just to dive in, head first and just go for it. I mean, after 6 years in this space, every single day, I am learning of new ways this technology can be applied to different industries. And it's completely fascinating. And I'm still learning every day. And I'm sure I'll be learning for the next 20, 30 years on how this technology actually gets implemented and adopted. So, if you want to be on the cutting leading edge and the transformational part of moving humanity into the next era, this is it. This is where it's at. So I encourage you to do that. So, thank you, Dr. Simon, for taking the time and having me on.
Thanks, Jared. It has been more fun than you can possibly imagine. You've started my weekend off with joy. For those of you who are unfamiliar with On the Brink, Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights, it's available on Amazon, and our podcast is available as well. You can find us at andysimon.com. And Jared,
I was going to say, just to step in there, it's an excellent book. I have read it, and it opened my eyes to this whole concept of corporate anthropology. I didn't really, it's a great idea. So I would highly encourage everybody to go out there, especially if you're a business manager or business owner, to go out there and read it. It's a great book.
Well, and that's very kind, because at the end of the day, this is culture change at its best or its worst, depending on how you look at it. But I think the time's going to change, and fast, and we're going to have some fun watching it happen, because it'll be so much better. And all the bad stuff that's going on now can be eliminated fast. So I'll say goodbye. It's been fun. Thank you. Let's do it again. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say goodbye now.
Bye-bye. Bye.